The nature of the beast. Alicia awoke to see the Brackens peering down at her. They read her rights, marched her to a wagon and drove her to a detention cell. The next day she found herself on trial accused of a violent crime of which she was sure, deep within her heart, she did not commit. There were no witnesses at the crime, for no one quite knew what had actually taken place, for the villains had used an anesthetizing gas, which had knocked everybody unconscious, and when they awoke, the side effects were amnesia accompanied by a superficial burning of the skin. The villains had also used a magnetic pulse and an organized crime syndicate, along with several political activists, that had not only turned off the electronics in the bank, but had created electronic mayhem along with several synchronized monetary and political crimes throughout the whole city. On top of that, free-for-all crime waves had erupted when everything was shut down. It was later found that several anarchic organizations had alerted the general public of the up and coming event via the internet. So it was not an act of spontaneity, it was part and parcel of organized crime. Times were hard on all of the worlds, with political mismanagement and unrest everywhere, and even the wealthy had uncertainties about their own financial stability and their place in the social pecking order in the near future. The times were known by the optimistic as the beginning of the Dark Ages, optimistic being that it was just a phase. By the pessimistic, it was known as the apocalypse, and all that was needed was one little spark like this and the whole system could come falling down, ending in anarchy and chaos. It was some time before order was restored after the crime, and this was one of the reasons why the authorities wished to set an example to scare off any kind of subsequent would-be villains from emulating this unruly act in the near or distant future. On the other side of the coin, someone had to be found and quickly punished to keep the authorities happy by showing that the police were not clueless and were doing their job. Alicia herself could not account for her presence at the crime, for she suffered from amnesia. So when she awoke from the gas, she could not even remember her own name. All she knew was her throat was sore, and that her skin that was not covered by clothes was blistered and burnt and was stinging. Because her fingerprints were not on any of the discarded military equipment, but were found on the vaults, she was accused of foul play only. She was not accused of murder. She also had concealed in her possession, when she was found, a little cluster of jewels of which she could not account for. When the police had run a basic check on them, they had in fact been stolen. Although they had not been stolen from their world, there was reference to them being down as missing on Santo. Then, there was the fact that she had a phony ID. They did not know at first, for it was a good counterfeit, and it even checked out on the mainframe, and had a whole history attached to it. It was only when they were treating her for her mild burns that they had noticed that Alicia's skin was not green, it was in fact blue, that they caught on. At first, they ran a thorough check on a suspected missing person, and it was then that they realized that the ID, the credit history, the college years and her schooling, right down to her birth, was all counterfeit. So, that she had a fake ID, and that her skin was painted green, when it was really blue. When applied to the other unsolved questions of why was she even at the bank in the first place, seemed to paint the perfect picture, that she was probably knee-deep in the crimes that had taken place on that eventful night. It was well known that the Blues had had their day, and it was obvious that some of them would try to cross over to where the money was, and at present within their crumbling society, this was in crime. The information on the missing jewels was shallow, for the two planets, as a rule, did not socially mingle. The distrust of each other dated right back to when Santo invaded the yellow and green skins worlds, in what they called planetary migration, and in what the yellow skins called subjugation. Unless one was a blue skin, there was not even an information pathway, let alone an information superhighway that linked their two worlds. So the report read that they had been stolen and no more. However, as I said above, they were not looking for true answers. They were just looking for somewhere to place the blame. The Blueskins lived a life of leisure off of the yellow and the greenskins' backs. The greens dealt with economics, law, politics, and government, and the yellow skins performed the physical labor and served in the forces. So politics, let alone involving themselves within the law and petty crime, did not enter their busy self-satisfying blue-skinned curriculums. It was not until the press brought it to everyone's attention that the reasons for Alicia's skin being painted green and her fake ID was because she was a contemporary criminal prodigy, in disguise, who had ethically crossed over and was now working with the underworld. The press went on to say that she should be punished like any other, and that her skin should not be taken into account when she was sentenced for the crime. Because she had no money to pay for a lawyer or a private detective for her defense, and the Blueskins could not intervene because of the political unrest throughout their colonies. Although they were in a non-win situation, for their act of non-intervention, and her being sentenced was what eventually led to their regal downfall. When it came, it was not so much a revolution, but a social reformation. Basically, it showed that finally and emphatically no skin was above the law. She was sentenced like any other criminal. She was given to a wrathful lynch mob in the guise of a jury that had already made up their minds before their appearance in court, because of the times and what they had read, even though they were told not to, in the papers. She was sentenced to the minimum of 22 years for her part in the robbery, and a further 25 for all the other crimes and chaos that was connected to it. After her sentencing, she was transported to one of the remote colonies in the Statham constellation, where she was to serve her punishment. Alicia had found herself in the darkest times of the penal system's history. Reformation was long overdue, but with the rise in crime due to social unrest, it was going to be a long time coming. The prisons were overcrowded and the sentences were long and arduous. There were no individual cells and everyone was clustered together in one large sleeping quarter. At night, there were no guards in the sleeping quarter. It was the survival of the fittest, and all manners of dark habits and drives were unleashed on the weaker inmates. From the outset, Alicia was victimized for her blue skin. The dominant female and her minions bullied and tormented her endlessly, and the guards would overlook her torment like they did to so many others, for they knew it was the nature of the beast. Alicia could see no light at the end of the tunnel, and she often thought of suicide. The only thing that kept her going were the thoughts that one day her memory would return, and she could plead her innocence and escape from this hell. One time, the dominant female Mendoza and her minions wrapped Alicia in bedding for everyone's amusement, and they pushed, spat, laughed and jeered at her. Alicia was reduced to tears, and everybody either joined in or stood by and let it happen. Everyone, including the guards, hated her for her blue skin. They would chant at her, "Where are your natural-born rights now, Blue?" The nights were even worse than the days, and many often abused her. Her stifled screams in time became silent, for she knew no one would come to her aid. They would only be excited by the goings-on and either stand by and watch, or join in. As the years rolled by, she became a shadow of her former self, and was victimized by everyone. It was in her 5th year that her memory came flooding back. At first, they appeared in dreams. Then little by little pockets of recognition began to manifest into her waking memory and consciousness, and eventually all her memory returned. She had been born in Masutu on Santo, and as a child she had always wanted to travel and visit all 19 worlds of embassies, which were the planets of her local solar system. When her aunt had passed away, she had nothing to hold her back. So she had sold her house and all of her belongings, so she could afford her wander ticket. At that, she followed her 16-year-old heart, and headed off on her interplanetary pilgrimage and her childhood dreams. She had decided to keep a low profile, and was practically dressed in rags, so the yellow and green-skinned bandits that lived in the outback would not victimize her. She had even had her skin painted green, like that of the green-skinned postgraduate intellectuals that wander around the empire before they eventually settle down and join the workforce. She thought that a green traveler would be a perfect disguise, so she could travel freely among the other planets unhindered. Her phony ID displayed her made-up details when it was fed into the main computer. She had based her fake life on a few romantic novels that she had read and fantasized about, books that had been written by the Greens. It was not hard for her to imagine what it was like to be a Green, for she felt their same drive for exploration and social reformation, and she believed that deep down on the soul level, the color of one's skin did not really matter. Her false self was more her alter ego rather than just some dreamt-up character. It became a living thing, and at the same time her new self became the avenue that would lead her out of the confines of the royal blues and into the warm arms of individual and spiritual freedom. She made a copy of her personal history and placed it in a subprogram on her fake ID. She compressed it and hid it among the trivial data where it could only be viewed via the passcode, which happened to be her real name backwards. She had done this just in case she got caught up in any unforeseen situation, or for when she wanted to come out of her covert travels and exploration and become Alice once more. She then deleted her personal records from the mainframe by infecting it with a self-devouring virus. She opened an account as Alicia in a respectable intergalactic bank with her phony ID and deposited all her savings that she said were inherited from her deceased family. The bank was happy to receive the money in these dark times, and they sought no further confirmation as they accepted her claim. Then, she used her account so she could pay for her intergalactic wonder ticket under her new persona, and again, they did not dig deep to verify it. They just accepted the cash, and Alicia became flesh. She had seen only 4 of the worlds in her solar system before she was caught up within the melee of the robbery. She was in the bank, and she was going to get some credits from the computer using her universal debit card, when the electrics in the bank went down, and a horde of criminals dressed in overalls and gas masks came into the bank, shooting the security guards on site. They got everyone to lay face down on the floor as they made their way to the vaults and the tillers. She remembered thinking that they were like a militia as they began to let off the gas canisters. Somehow, they knew Alicia would be there as they sought her out and forced her to wear a mask against her will at gunpoint. They then led her to the vault as they blew the locks with an explosive device, and then they made her open it by hand. She could only guess that this was some scheme that had been dreamt up and passed on to the underworld via the communes, in which she had had several drinks with fellow green-skinned travelers and would-be revolutionaries. Here, she had let out of the bag that her skin was really blue and not green, and that she was a rebel like them, and that come the day, she would fight for the cause alongside them. She should have known that everybody has a mask, and that it takes time until one sees the real being behind the mask before she spoke out. Alicia had always been a loner, for she found it difficult to live and think blue. She had always wrapped herself up in her studies, or her banned green literature, in her room when she was in her youth. Her aunt had been her only living family member and solitary friend when she was alive, and when she had passed she knew that she was now truly on her own. She was a green-thinking, blue-skinned philosopher, and it was her rational thinking in full drive that had led her to this horrific situation. I will win them over when in my disguise, and when they see that we were like-minded and that they had my empathy for the social status and situation, I will reveal myself in my true color, and I will work with them for a social and economical revolution. However, she did not take into account that everybody has their own views and ways, and that it could all go wrong and backfire. She knew that she was somehow being used as a pawn, for 3 of her green-skinned friends had told her to meet them in the bank, and they were not there, and that from there they would all go shopping for provisions. She did not have time to give it the true thought that it deserved, for the villains made her take out the money and jewels and put them in the empty bags. When she had cleared the vault, they had ordered her to take off her mask, and she was finally rendered unconscious with the effects of the gas. When she was knocked unconscious, she was robbed of her Wanda ticket and debit card, and they left the phony identity card because they knew it would land her in trouble if it were discovered to be a fake. She had also managed to hold on to her personal treasure, which was a small cluster of jewels that her aunt's neighbors had given her, because they were concealed in her hidden pocket. The jewels were reported stolen when a neighbor's house had been robbed and ravaged a decade before her aunt's death. Alice had found them a few weeks later in a bush down the street. They supposed that the escaping burglars probably dropped them as they made their hasty getaway, and her aunt and Alice took them back to their rightful owners straight away. However, when the neighbors had reported it to their insurers, they had dismissed it by telling them that they were such small items. When compared to the rest that were still missing, it was not worth all the paperwork and recalculations. So they were told that they could keep them, because there were no sentimental attachments toward the jewels and it reminded them of the robbery. But they must not mention it to anyone official to avoid a scandal. They gave them to Alice as a special present built on the premise of losers weepers and finders keepers. Her aunt had helped her stitch a secret pocket in her clothes, a special pocket where she could hide them, so no one but herself, her aunt and her neighbors ever knew that she had them. As she grew up, every time she bought a new dress, she carried on making her secret pockets on her own, and it became her best kept secret. She tried to alert the prison guards of her awakening, but they did not want to listen, so having no one to turn to, she began to grow bitter. Her irritation escalated into violence, and it was then that she began to rise in the ranks, and eventually only Mendoza, the #1 gang leader, and her motley crew could victimize her. Mendoza could see that this woman was gaining respect from the inmates, and that if she did not stop her soon, she would be toppled from the top of the pecking order. As time went by, Alicia began to take on fellow comrades, and the power among the inmates was eventually split into two. Nobody liked the situation, but her violence was beyond compare. So although everybody despised her blue skin deep down, they were respectful on the surface. Alicia was no longer naive to the system, and she knew that even though she could probably topple Mendoza and her pack, if she did this she would create a vacuum, and a new aggressor would rise from the ranks to fill the void. She knew that if she toppled the new aggressor, another aggressor would rise. So she had to form a way in which to seize the power, not by force, but with respect. She knew that Mendoza had gained respect already of her might, and that Alicia could take away her remaining power at any time, if she so wished. All that was left were for her to show her the power of her mind. She knew that Mendoza would search out any would-be aggressors on the rise, and thin the herd, if they reached a compromising treaty. As the power shifted, the governess asked to see Alicia in her office, and Alicia was given a proposition, and was promised a small reduction of her sentence and certain benefits and comforts, if she complied with her wishes. As time went by, Alicia built up rapport with the governess, and she told her of her innocence. The governess at first saw it as folly or deception, and did not take it seriously. However, it did seem somewhat out of character from the one that she had begun to know and have respect for. This and Alicia's relentless persistence eventually prompted her to send for, and then examine the fake ID. She found the sub-program, and entered the code, just as Alicia had said, and Alice's details came up on the screen. She alerted Alicia of her findings and told her that she had made a record, and she would put in an appeal in the legal system, and if she was found innocent with this new evidence from her memory recall. Now that she had her memory back, and she knew the truth that her sentence would be dropped, and she should gain a lump sum of money as compensation for her plight and the loss of her years and freedom. She said that she had all the details on her computer, and that she was going to leave a message on her desktop along with the fake ID for when the new governess took over, which was the following day. Alicia asked her what she meant, and she replied that unfortunately her time was up and that her retirement began tomorrow. However, she told her that the new governess was well respected, and that she would deal with the situation both orderly and properly, and that she would be emancipated from the penal colony as soon as she was found innocent in court. The next day the new governess was sworn in, and she was very strict and stern. It had been several days and Alicia still did not hear a word about her release. She eventually asked her if she had seen the file and the ID, and she denied seeing it and dismissed her like the common criminal that she thought she was. In addition, she told her that the system had changed and that there was to be no compromises with any of the prisoners. You follow her rules, and if you did not comply, your sentence was extended and the leisure times would be withdrawn. Alicia eventually heard in the wind that one of Mendoza's tribe had deleted the file and destroyed the ID, and had then covered up her trail before she exited. Mendoza knew that Alicia had a good heart, and although she and her tribe were second in command, she was getting no younger, and she would have major problems if Alicia was released. Alicia was outraged. She had a fight with Mendoza and her tribe, and Mendoza and 4 of her crew were killed in the process, with a further 7 badly hurt and hospitalized. The new governess extended Alicia's sentence to the end of her natural life, of which she served 20 of those years, as the most vindictive dominant female of all time. At the age of 47, she was murdered in her sleep by one of her most trusted friends in a deal that she had struck with a new up-and-coming aggressor. Her friend knew that Alicia was near the end of her dominance, and it was a wise move on her part to leave the sinking ship. At the same time, she knew that Marsha, the new aggressor, needed associates and soldiers to strengthen her clan if she were to remain at the top. The murder of Alicia was never even recognized, let alone brought to trial or justice. They saw it as the demise of the blue-skinned terror, and everyone was glad to see the end of her reign. It was logged in the prison's computer that she died naturally in her sleep. However, that was not the last that anybody had heard or seen of her. There were many sightings by both the inmates and the prison staff, who were said to have seen her tormented spirit wandering after dark throughout the penal colony. At first, there were reports of mice or rats infesting the colony, then it was the rapports, swiftly followed by scraping and the sound of heavy objects being moved and sometimes dropped where there were no objects to be seen. Then, real objects began flying, crashing and smashing all over the place. Then came the voice. At first it seemed to have an artificial quality about it, as if it was made out of electric, or was coming through a slightly out of frequency radio, or transmitter of some kind. However, as time went on it became unmistakably the sound and character of Alicia's voice, although it was hoarse and ferocious, and was cursing and screaming for vengeance. Then, she was finally seen, and with the apparition came a feeling of blind terror and panic. Many strange happenings began to occur, and even if one were not open-minded to the spiritual side of life, the occurrences were so abstract from everyday events that crop up in the norm that they could only be seen as anomalies of the spiritual nature. Tables were overturned, chairs smashed, and the chapel was desecrated as Alicia's evil spirit dished out her wrath against the colony. Then came the physical anomalies. Not only did objects keep moving and smashing, but things began disappearing and reappearing even through walls. Personal belongings began turning up in the most unlikely places, which caused havoc amongst not only the inmates and the wardens, but also between the prison staff's top officials and the governess. It seemed that nobody was out of the sphere of influence. Then, the new governess was found dead in her office. She was diagnosed of having had a heart attack. It was said that there was a look of terror on her face that gave a chill to even the most callous personalities that saw her. According to her medical records, she had never had problems with her heart up until that point. It stated that she was a strong, stern character, who ruled with an iron rod. She was called the Ice Queen, because she was a strong believer of corporal and capital punishment. She had tried to break Alicia's spirit on many occasions, but her will could not be broken. She physically and psychologically abused her in the name of punishment and discipline, but to no avail, though she never gave up right up until Alicia's death. She had many enemies, because of her totalitarian beliefs and behavior on both sides of the penal colony's walls, and many were glad to see her vanquished. Some suggested that she was probably given strychnine, a fatal dose of nicotine, or some kind of toxic that left no trace in its aftermath, by some devotees that still held mixed emotions about the way that Alicia, or themselves, had been mistreated. The most accepted, and I think the most logical, or comfortable view, was that she was traumatized by the stresses that came with the job, and eventually they came to the surface, manifesting as a heart attack. One could leave it there and be done with it. However, that was only the beginning of quite a few chains of events that were to come. The inmates were robbed when a naive, shy young female that worked quite happily as a catering assistant in the kitchen turned psychotic in the sleeping quarters one fine night. She attacked 7 inmates and 5 guards before she was eventually shot dead. 3 guards pinned her down at one time, while 2 who were already dead lay at their feet as they tried the passive route to detain her. She sank her teeth into the jugular of one of the guards, biting clean through her neck like it was an apple before she escaped their clutch. She then plunged her knife into a second guard, and she ripped open her stomach and began to dress herself up in her steaming intestines. The third guard looked on, incapacitated by the shock and the horror, and she was eventually shot dead as she was eating the still beating heart of the third guard. Her physical strength was insurmountable, as she ripped apart the chest of the guard and sunk her face into her open chest to devour her heart. Everyone that knew her said that it was totally out of her character, and that her strength was supernatural. The logical explanation was that she had repressed her emotions, and unlike the governess, she became delusional and extremely psychotic. Either that or someone had slipped her some PCP, and she had lost the plot. Then, there were the prisoners that went mad. Before they went totally insane and beyond reach, they began to tell horrific tales about seeing Alicia's spirit hovering over them at night, leering, tormenting and snarling at them. They said that she somehow was able to place horrific feelings, thoughts and visions into their heads, and that they had been thrown across the room, and heavy objects, such as bookcases and wardrobes, had pinned them down. Some of them began choking and suffered from acute spells of asphyxiation, only being released from their torment when they became unconscious. Others found themselves levitating high above their beds at night when they were awoken from their sleep, and some found themselves pushed down flights of stairs by their invisible assailant. 5 guards in the staff room saw another guard being dragged up a flight of stairs that led to the room by an invisible force. They could see the guard's face had a dent that seemed to be the pressure marks of an invisible force, and her hair looked as if it was being tugged as she made her unnatural ascent up the stairs. Then terror swept throughout the prison, and it did not stop at the prisoners alone, for it seemed that no one was out of reach or safe from harm. Even more guards began seeing her tormented soul, and 3 more became her victims. One of the guards apparently lost control and shot dead 2 of her colleagues. She left a suicide note knowing that she was going to be sentenced to the other side of the bars. She said that she had blanked out, and when she awoke, She found herself standing over her work associates, covered in their blood with the murder weapon in her hand. She could still smell the residue of the gun smoke and the smell of blood that lingered in the air amongst the carnage. Although she never remembered carrying out the brutal event, she could see by the mutilated bodies that they had been sadistically savaged. It was thought that she had made them into her own personal gladiators, making them turn on each other like savage animals, by forcing them to do combat with the kitchen utensils from the staff canteen. She probably convinced them that the victor would live, before she shot them both several times until dead. Eyes had been gouged out with spoons, and other cutlery had also left their ferocious, sadistic, vindictive toll on the corpses. So, she left her suicide note and then shot herself in the head with her pistol. The horrific events escalated into almost an incalculable number, and many guards, and even governesses came and went. The reputation of the colony and phenomenon grew, and it began to gain attention on all 9 planets. Even the miners on the moons throughout had heard of the tales, and these moons were the most remote within the entire solar system. In the end, a new governess took the job. She had been acquired from the Army Psi Division. She had been a major in the army and had several legions under her. So tackling the new job was a slight shift from officers and soldiers to guards and inmates. She also had a new psychic perspective to deal with. This time, it was not telecoercion, telepathy and telekinetic disturbances from the living. It was a discarnate psychopath sowing its wrath. Although there were no records of a poltergeist killing anyone all throughout history, she had had dealings with the dark magicians, who were caught doing deals between the lower astral discarnate souls and vengeful living beings in the name of black magic and or voodoo. Apparently, the black magicians would be voluntarily possessed for a short duration, and the discarnate spirit could then enjoy the physical fruits of the worlds once more. Then, in return, they would subject the magician's dark wrath onto their would-be victims, which would sometimes result in their deaths. Usually, poltergeists would behave like mischievous spoilt children, and they would generally haunt for 6 months or so and then move on or become dormant. However, with the collaboration of the black magicians and the lower-level discarnate spirits bringing on bad luck, insanity, and premature deaths, the possibility of a psychopathic murderous bad spirit could not be ruled out. Further, if that were the case, the problem may not cease until it was properly dealt with or solved. Therefore, the new prison governess took on the challenge to get to the bottom of these paranormal horrific events, and she would leave no stone unturned. She sought the help of a well-known and respected priest to exorcise Alicia's tormented lost spirit. However, the priest was driven insane, and it was said that he left the priesthood just before committing suicide. When the police read his diary, his last entry read, "I have stared in the face of pure evil, and my faith could not measure up to its power. Without my faith, I am powerless to its torture and demands. So, I have decided to end this torment, hoping that the Great Spirit can cradle me in its strong protective arms in death, if not in life. O Lord, please forgive me for what I am about to do and for what I have done." They found his butchered wife and his 4 children upstairs in their rooms. The blood was awash on the floors, walls, and there were even splashes splattering the ceilings. A well-known psychic investigator was called upon, and he set up a séance to try to contact her. At first, there was an array of poltergeist and other paranormal activities, as her tortured spirit bucked like a mule for being summoned and controlled by the medium. Eventually, after her ranting and raging and showing some confusion of not knowing that she was dead, she found a new power. Yes, the tables took a sharp turn as Alicia's tortured spirit possessed the spirit medium. She knocked the medium into a deep trance, used her ectoplasm to impress her ethereal energy onto it, and created a physical body. Once she had the body, she marched over to the door and snapped the key in the lock. Then she began to systematically slaughter the Spirit Circle members as they tried to escape her wrath by running around the room in blind horror, panic, or weeping hysterically in the corners collapsed on the floor. Some even tried to hide under the table, but Alicia smashed the table into matchsticks and drove them from their hiding place, then fatally mutilated them. She ripped their arms and legs out their sockets, and it was not until the governess ordered her marksman to shoot the medium that Alicia disintegrated and 2 members managed to survive the ordeal. The marksman had had several direct hits when they shot at Alicia's spirit, and the governess had no choice but to order the death of the entranced medium, for she knew that Alicia would have killed all 3, saving the medium until last, because she needed her energies to survive in this realm. The governess took precautions after that fatal error by bringing in 3 mental mediums instead of a physical medium, and the placement of electronic devices that were manned by a PSI officer who was ready to trigger a whole host of electronic frequencies and noises that they knew from experience would vanquish the evil spirit if they sensed any malicious behavior coming on. Alicia's spirit knew that she had been beat. She could not come and fight without being vanquished by the machines, and she could not fight the mediums as they formed a union and mentally willed her in. After many sessions, she began to settle down, and they finally won her trust. It was when they were able to get beneath the anger that she proclaimed her frustration was born from her violated innocence. The PSI operatives that were out in the field were alerted of the plight, and they found the lost Wanda ticket that had been stolen from her so long ago. It had been found in a miscellaneous storeroom and logged that it was picked up during a raid on a suspected criminal's home. It did not take long to acquire a confession from the prisoner who had taken it. He was serving 3 life sentences that were running concurrently for armed robbery, and had for some time made his peace with the Great Spirit. Even without his newfound faith, he had nothing to gain by lying, so he told the truth to the investigator and the court at the trial. He told them that his little band of unruly citizens never did the same act twice, no matter how spectacular and effective, so all their crimes could not be connected. However, he told them the amount that was taken and also gave a full detailed description of the crime and their technical antics that only the police could know. He told them that that particular robbery was not their own, so to speak, as he told them of the green activists that had come to them with a plan of a perfect set of simultaneous crimes that in its wake would be an easy escape among all the confusion and chaos. All they had to do was set up the blue-skinned girl that was pretending to be a green as a scapegoat, and if they did that, they did not even want a share of the booty, and they would hand over their plans. He said, they had a photo of her of which they handed over, so we could not mistake her identity, and that was it. They gave us their plans, and we made a few phone calls and set our watches, and did the robbery. When the trial was reopened, Garcia, the retired governess, was summoned. Garcia remembered the tale, and was shocked at Alicia's fate. It did not take long to draw the correct conclusion, especially when it was discovered that one of Mendoza's minions had worked in the office at the time when the 2 governesses' working destinies had not met, but had crossed. In addition, it was found that she had the expertise in her head and the technology at her fingertips to carry out the crime and then cover her trail. Unfortunately, Mendoza had assassinated the hacker after she had committed her illicit act. It was thought that she did it to keep her from any kind of confession in case the word got out. Garcia did not look back to see if Alicia was released, for she trusted the judicial system and had belief in the new governess when she was faced with all the evidence. She said that she did wonder about Alicia and what had become of her from time to time, but she thought she had been released and fully compensated. She at first kept one eye on the news, but after a time, She thought that the system had bribed Alicia to keep it all hushed to avoid embarrassment in these still very dark grey times. She was probably the only person in all the worlds and moons that had not heard of the horrific haunting at her former works. However, 6 months after she had retired, she had gone to an ancient monastery to find peace and enlightenment in her old age. She was totally out of touch with the entire external goings-on of the outside worlds. Alicia was found not guilty in her retrial, and the psychic investigator told Alicia of the news in one of their sittings after the trial. After his positive message, Alicia finally found peace and forgiveness for herself and others, and although she could not undo what had been done, she found clarity and lucidity. During one of the subsequent sittings, her departed aunt came down to collect her, and she was never seen again. The long sought after social and societal reformations finally came into fruition, and the blue, yellow and green-skinned people of Glary ended the Dark Age by the total disintegration of the class system and the redistribution of the wealth, education, opportunities and power. They had also seen the ruination and abominable damnation that were the effects of the nature of the beast and the penal colony that had caused so much damage to a sweet, innocent, adventurous teenage child by transforming her to an out-and-out brutal monster. That it was eventually closed down and demolished. It was turned into an ambient and spiritual retreat for those that would seek spiritual communion, or just a break from the hustle and bustle of their busy lives. There was an honor statue erected of Alicia, which was built where the gates once stood to commemorate the confusion and bullying brought about by the malicious brutality that the penal colony had dealt out in the Dark Age. This was before the Reformation came about, where eventually rehabilitation surpassed retribution. For they thought it was better to have happy prisoners getting along better, improving their moral and social standards, and doing their time, than ominous monsters afflicting all with their outrage, because of their unjust suppression and perpetual persecution.